Okay, we're back at it.
Yeah, it's great to be here again, Corey. It's been great. We got a great show coming up here.
I almost feel like we're living here.
The sleeping bag's right over here.
Like we've been here a lot.
Yeah, it's been great, actually. It's been a good season. It's a good season.
It's been incredible. And, today, we have, part deux.
This is it. And as we know, it was like we were talking earlier, is that a lot of great things. The second version is always great, like Empire Strikes Back. It's the better, arguably better than the first one.
That's actually a great example. I would agree with you on that. So,
not Jaws though.
We mentioned that. Yes. Jaws 2 is not as good.
Jaws 2 is not as good. There's a couple of really bad Batman.
Indiana Jones' second one was not good.
It's not good.
But Back to the Future, the second one, I think you could make a case that it was very strong.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be, we had a great show before. This is even going to be better. We've got great topics, great discussion coming up.
Launchpad. We're going straight to the moon here. This is crazy. Okay. So today on the show, we have returning guest, Eric Pook, who is the president of Cirrus Consulting Group, North America's preeminent commercial real estate and office lease negotiation firm for dentists, doctors, and veterinarians. Eric has been consulting small businesses since the late 90s with an emphasis on revenue creation and cost mitigation. He grew up in a medical entrepreneurial environment and continued that passion by starting and growing businesses throughout North America. Erica advises doctors each day on how to successfully leverage the dental office lease agreement to maximize practice value while reducing risk and liability. Eric, welcome to the show, and we're glad to have you in person today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah,
Great to be here in person. And on the way up, I was listening to Walter Isaacson's book on Elon Musk. So, hey, let's get the sleeping bags into the room. And,
Perfect.
And that's what they did to launch rockets. They had everybody sleep on the floor as they're figuring out how to get this stuff into the atmosphere.
It's quite a story. They put a lot of work into that. Great to have you here, Eric.
Great to be here.
Well, today we're kind of taking a little bit of a twist on the show today, and we're kind of wanting to focus, maybe we call it best practices, things to be looking at or considering in one's medical practice. And so we have a couple of different views on things, I would say. I think we're all probably on the same page, but we might be looking at things with different lenses at times.
Yeah, I think the last time we talked to you, Eric, it was clear that when we had a conversation about practitioners in general and professionals, there was definitely opportunities there where there just wasn't enough planning. There was times when they're certainly in very similar situations. There's a pattern of situations that they come into, but there definitely is a lack of foresight, a lack of planning, some risks that really could be mitigated with just better conversation. Is that what you're finding?
Absolutely. It's sort of why we existed, why we were founded 30 years ago. And out in Alberta, I just got back from Vancouver. It was the big Pacific Dental Conference. And we were, we had a nice little podium and booth and just fantastic conversations with doctors across the entire spectrum. That early career doctor thinking about buying or building their first clinic, that mid-career doctor thinking, shoot, should I expand? Should I renovate? Should I relocate? How do I grow? And then the transitioning doctor, which continues to boggle me at times, is just a couple of quick questions about when do they plan to retire? If they own their space, do they want to keep that as a form of rental income going into retirement, etc.? And then who's been giving you advice, or how is it structured? Who owns the building? Who owns the practice? And yeah, it's a lot of those. You just sort of shake your head to talk with the husband and wife, and they say, "Gosh, honey, I really do think we should keep the building." And yeah, okay. Meanwhile, the doctor's already in sort of sales mode, and now the accountants are going to have lots of work to do to try to separate the two, or how to try to mitigate some taxes, because oh, hey, I bought it in 1996 and I bundled it together when I purchased the real estate and the practice. Well, of course, now the practice is probably 2 or 3 million. The buildings in Vancouver, probably another million. Gosh, who's going to buy both of those at once? That's a ton of debt load for a new doctor. So yeah, on preparation and preparedness and structure is absolutely something that we continue to sort of scream from the rooftops so that doctors realize just how valuable they are to the landlord, or how much work they've put in, and how the smallest little components can impact hundreds of thousands of dollars on their eventual exit.
Because they have, how many credits do they get for business education in university?
I asked that as well, funny enough, and with some of the team at MNP or some of the different universities. We did a sponsorship event for some of the alumni for University of Alberta and others. And still there is, ask any physician, vet, dentist, and it is usually half of a course or some sort of pizza lunch that, you know, one of the groups came in to say, hey, let's learn about financing, or let's learn about X. And purely optional. So we've tried to,
Just building a business, it can't be that hard.
No, easy. Everybody can do it, right?
Yeah.
Or all the ads now on Instagram. You know, don't start a business, just buy one.
You just need a TikTok account. And pretty much you can do it yourself.
Oh, that's a whole other show. But no, it's one of those where, you know, with the proper, you know, planning, structure, etc. Tufts now, we were speaking at one of their 4th year programs. So one of their professors was a client of ours who had us very involved with that 4th year business of dentistry component. Schulich has created a recent mini MBA program that is specifically designed for the mid-career dentist, which is fantastic because as a lot of these great practitioners are now saying, well, now I'm running multiple businesses. I might own the real estate. I might have 2 or 3 clinics. I might have a hygiene corp that was popular, you know, a few decades ago, and suddenly realize, hey, I really need to learn. And now I know what I don't know. So they've added me on as one of the faculty members at the Schulich Mini MBA, just again to help ensure that those mid-career doctors have the right help, guidance, planning to ensure that as they continue to grow, they're doing it the right way.
I find this remarkable because the more we talk about these conversations, and it doesn't matter who I speak with. It could be lawyers, it could be accountants, someone like yourself, works in this sector. You would think that most professionals or practitioners would have everything looked after, but that's just not the case. It's almost rampant how underserved it is. They don't spend enough time themselves preparing themselves. They don't spend enough time maintaining or looking after things as they proceed. And then I feel like we usually pick it up way down the road. It comes in to me when the practitioner has established themselves and built a great deal of wealth, then maybe comes looking now for some advice at that particular point in time. And it's shocking because now you're seeing things that you should have identified or seen or looked after years ago. And it's not just us. It's like I said, it's all of those professionals are seeing that in the same way. Because when we discuss it, I think everyone has the same grumbles. It's like if we could give somebody, this fictitious person, advice, it would be, hey, let's get on this early on. Let's talk about these really critical conversations at the beginning. Because, man, I would have told you to do things a lot differently.
It's mind-boggling. I had lunch with Neil Pressner, who works for one of the local dental practice brokerages, and we did a CE course not long ago at MNP's offices here in town, and part of the conversation was a case study, and it showed a doctor that sold a $4 million clinic, right, and basically paid 0 tax. And here was another one that sold, you know, a $3 or $3.5 million clinic and paid millions of tax unnecessarily, right, or purely based on planning.
Structure.
Correct.
Yeah.
And as I was saying the other day, it's probably of the 50 to 75 doctors I have the privilege of talking to on a monthly basis, I'd say at least when I'm asking the questions, probably 30 to 35% don't have even the basic will and estate planning in place today. And, as they own a corporation, they own a holdco, they are in essence running multiple different businesses. And I just, I know I should, I just, haven't got around to it. I'm busy. I've got a young family. I've got this going on. I've got that going on. And it can be devastating because all it takes is that one event, right? Car accident, heaven forbid, the doctor passes away, as I was sharing an example with last week. And it's that preparation that, hey, talking about the dental office lease or negotiating the dental office lease, I'll get to it every 5 years, but it's the bigger stuff that without just even these complimentary conversations with yourselves when you came to talk to our team, or otherwise, it's just those high level core tidbits that can help slightly redirect the direction of the ship to then save an unbelievable amount of frustration and headaches and liabilities, because these leases, most doctors just don't know what they don't know, and that binding to their estates. And if they pass away, it goes to the spouse, and that that poor doctor's wife that was north of the GTA, and she got stuck paying for 9.5 months worth of rent after the doctor had passed away. So yeah, while it's not the most exciting components, it's almost a guilt that some practitioners have. Well, look, I've been successful, I've been profitable, and oh shoot, I forgot to renew my lease on time, so the landlord's kicking in a 30% rent increase. Well, I guess it's a great building, good space, so well, I guess I better sign my renewal. And that's happening every single day, yet they're the best tenants on the planet. So it falls into that foresight. We typically advise starting the lease renewal process 2 years prior. And most doctors say, well, gosh, it's
a long time.
It only takes us a little bit of time. But okay, doctor, if you wanted to move across the street on Albert Street here, how long would it take you, right? Or even worse, if the landlord put a brown envelope on the beautiful studio here and said, right, you need to be out within the next 3 months, right? Easy for you guys to do, to move all the fancy gear in studio. But for that dentist, plumbing, electrical, zoning, etc., it's up to 18 to 24 months to pick up and relocate a dental clinic. Plus, it's $300 per square foot to build out now. Plus, who's the trades, the contractors, where you're ordering your nice A-deck chairs from down in the US, and it's got to be all customized. It's an absolute nightmare. But of course, landlords know this, so it's easy for them to defer, deflect, delay for as long as possible. And then in some cases, even after that option to renew deadline has passed, which is the key date that sets that I'm either going to stay for another 5 years or I'm going to leave, well, landlords found a great way to increase their profit without a penny of additional expense, purely just by running out the clock. And then they can put down whatever new lease at whatever new rental rates across the board. So our typical guidance is start early, similar to yours. Start 24 months prior to that annual 5-year lease renewal. It sort of knocks a landlord off of their regular, delay, defer type of track. And it gives us the time that if the landlord's going to add in the right to demolish the building or to relocate the practice, then it gives at least the doctor the ability to then move across the street and not have to be scrambling, right? Because even when they're shut down or forced to shut down to try to find a new space, it's not even the lack of revenue. It's the patient attrition, which patients go down the street and they never come back. So I tell you, get
can't afford the
passionate
disruption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So the more long-term continuity and predictability of that revenue via the lease is what the banks want to make sure they have in place. And we were just down in Vancouver with RBC and TD and all of those. And that's what the banks are looking at, is what's the likelihood that this new doctor that they're about to lend $2 million to is going to be able to pay back that loan for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And rule of thumb is if there isn't 12 years worth of term on the lease, then they won't give them 12 years worth of term on the loan to pay back that $2 million. right? Because they'll only usually do it to, rule of thumb is, if there's 10 years left on the lease or 7 years left on the lease, they're only going to give the doctor 7 years to pay it back, because that's the assurance that they're going to be in that same space.
So for you guys, getting in front of somebody early is always better. Like that's the same, like very similar to our own firm, as Steve did. Like we're looking at, like our early beginnings began, and how we cultivated the culture and the vision for our corporation was to, take advantage of the fact that most firms that were operating when we started, it was a very commission type, sales, transactional type experience. And we wanted to build out a whole culture of advice, advice-centric, being able to provide answers prior to solutions. And in some of those, and I'll speak to them briefly here so we can kind of put some context, is like there's a lot of different areas, like yourself. You're providing advice to practitioners and professionals in a lot of different areas, and we are as well. We're sitting there with whether it's the financial management, which is a section, it's a risk mitigation and risk management. We're looking at investment, portfolio, wealth management. There's the estate planning, tax planning. There's behavioral finance. There's legal oversight. Sometimes we're not lawyers, obviously, but we can provide some commentary to say, hey, this is a time to be speaking and bring in a legal professional. There's a lot of different elements that apply to both personal and to corporate situations that for ourselves, if we can find somebody soon enough and early enough in that stage of growth, it makes a big difference. And we regularly do that. And I like to, but just like you, as I'm listening, I'm thinking, man, there's so many similarities. For us, it's just getting in front of the right people at the right time to be able to say, hey, we want to help you.
And I've got to imagine, you're at the center of it all, right? As you're trying to advise everything from soup to table nuts, right, how to navigate them through the next 10 or 20 years, etc. In some cases, just like any marketing, it's not until the 5th or 6th or 7th meeting that they say, look, you know what, you are going to die, death and taxes. And therefore, I know, Mr. Smith, Dr. Smith, I know life insurance isn't of utmost importance, or, maybe your view on life insurance is X or Y, but, here's the choices. Either this amount, if you pass, and I was talking to a doctor the other day and their estate didn't plan it out. The parents made it, to be as straightforward to move it from the father who passed to the mother. The mother then died within 6 months afterwards, before they did any estate freeze, before they did any preparedness. Ugh. And lo and behold, they have to now sell 2 of the 3 rental properties just because of the massive capital gains on the last survivors from the mother's passing. So even with a pretty astute and, proper planning, family, still trying to convince them, dad was opposed, right? By the time that mom took over, she passed shortly thereafter. And now they're having to go through and sell, which never would the parents have wanted to do. Right. So in some cases it's that, hey, we've got to talk about the estate freeze. We've got to think about how either A, we pay it, right, in taxes and have to, swallow the pill. But heck, even if some of my own extended family or in-laws, et cetera, it's a difficult conversation. They just don't want to think about it or focus on it. And it's sort of, well, that's for someone else to deal with. And it's crazy, but that's unfortunately the mindset. So usually it's the 3rd or 4th time, or maybe it's maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's something that sort of says, okay, look, what's the actual step-by-step approach, and what do I really need to do? Because I'm thinking, oh my God, I got to do a will, I got to do estate planning, I got to do life insurance. But when you actually break it down or figure out what those 4 or 5 steps to fill in, it's not that much work. It's just giving the direction. And for me personally, even when I was living in Toronto before moving down to California, it was the question of, hey, what happens if I'm gone, right, as an only child? My parents are gone as an only child, and my grandmother's 104 years old. She's still here, for Pete's sakes. But it was one of that common disaster clause that I just didn't, in my early 20s, you're not really thinking about that anyways, because you're thinking you're invincible. But it was enough that it just delayed me even locking in my own personal will before, starting the first or second business. So that was, again, it's part of it. It's 9 times out of 10, it's the blockage in their own mind. But having the right person over the right beer I'm thinking Joe Rogan's going to show up here with a nice little
No, it's
glass of scotch.
me as well. It's
Right? Yeah, come on, Corey.
Oh, sorry.
Right? Those tiny little things just helps to eat the elephant one step at a time. And then once it's done, oh my God, it's just one extra thing that's a huge weight off the shoulder. So I've got to imagine that's one of your biggest challenges, is just to try to, how do we help to eat that elephant one step at a time? And then, because we did the estate freeze, now let's look at XYZ, right? Here's still the tax or debt obligation. Have we thought about this? And then once you've shown value the first time, the vast majority of our clientele are either referrals, or we're doing it for a second or third type of location, because it's easy to justify once they've actually seen, the magic being made in the background.
Well, you're so busy running your practice that, it doesn't take long for years to pass. Not days, not weeks, but years.
Yeah,
and
true.
so, I'm going to get to that, and 10 years has gone by. It doesn't really take long. And it's not, in terms of people's mortality and where they're at, you really, we kind of look at it, a little bit differently, and we want to capture what's your goals? What do you want in life? Where are you going? What are the things that are really important to you when you pass the keys? Like, where are you going? What does that really mean to you, right? Because people spend their majority of their life working, and they think about retirement, they think about succession, but it's really hard to visualize. Everybody knows how painstaking it is to go through a goal setting exercise, and when it's on your own business that you've basically captained the ship, and it's been a money-making machine, and it doesn't look like it's going to run out, might get away with something. Might not need to plan as much, which we know is false, but it's really, that planning is key to success for everyone.
Sure, you make a good point, Corey, about not getting something done, right? And you're making a good point too, Eric, about chunking it out a little bit, because it is like eating an elephant. There's a lot to this. So that the pain point here for a lot of these people that are busy, the practitioner, the professional, the doctor that's going to do this, is that if they can go through a goals exercise and tell you what they want, but if they're not held accountable to some degree, and if it doesn't happen, and it's 10 years down the road and nothing has changed, they're no far better off. So, that's again part of this wrapper that you wrap around to say, this is how we can help. It's like, hey, we want to get in tune with your goals, your needs, but then also help encourage you to start eating that elephant, start picking away at this. And to the point that I actually break that down, as you gain experience, I feel like you just learn, okay, sometimes if you give someone 10 things to do, they're not going to do any of them. So now to the point, I'm just assertive enough to say, hey, Eric, here's the first three things that we have to accomplish. And then there's lots to do here. But until we accomplish those, we really don't need to tackle anything else at this point. You've got three major things we have to do. And that's the first thing they need to set their goals on. It's like, okay, great. Let's make those changes. Let's start on that small list, bang off that first three, then we'll work on the next three.
And it's tough, speaking to physicians, vets, dentists that are just out of school. Overwhelmed is an understatement, right? They have group practices that are saying, gosh, you owe $350,000 now. You're going to have to, interest payments are starting to come up. Hey, come work with us up in Brandon, Manitoba, and, right, we'll help to pay off your debt. Oh, you want to own a clinic? Oh my gosh, geez, you're going to have to deal with leases and landlords and employment agreements and pop.
Sure.
So it's tough. We actually had one of our clients come and speak to our team at our national kickoff this year. And he shared, sort of some of the challenges that we face, which is the younger doctor when they're signing that first lease or when they're buying their first business and they're getting that structure. Getting things structured the right way takes money, but it's proactive investment versus reactive cost. Most doctors are just so excited to get going. We did the video for the dentist for the San Francisco Giants, and he said, look, I started, a family friend was a lawyer. They had a quick look at my lease, but we were so excited to get going that we really didn't negotiate for much. We just wanted to get running. And yeah, it's some of those that you've got those that are most price conscious, if you will. And quite frankly, they're still eating ramen noodles, and now they're about to buy $1 million practice and now take on even more debt load. Yeah, I know there's all this sort of stuff I should be thinking about, but I can only handle so much now because, the average clinician is the sole breadwinner for the clinic. They're doing 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of the revenue for the clinic, dentistry, hygiene, etc., as they're ramping this stuff up. And, today, anywhere throughout the country, especially in the urban areas, you're $1 million before you see your first patient.
Yeah.
Right? In a dental clinic. So $350 per build out cost could be another $500,000 for the equipment side, which, digital dentistry is, it's unbelievable the sort of stuff they're doing now, the lasers, it's unbelievable. But it's the same sort of foundation as to say, well, gosh, how do I really determine what I should use, who I should use, and when? We did a great video with Dr. Aisling Whitaker, who started up her own business called Dental Hive, because her own clinic was just needing different resources, let it be staffing or just how to open. So we did 2 new starts with her. The second one and the webinar we did afterwards was particularly about what did I do differently, the second clinic versus the first. Mm-hmm. And here's the $100,000 less I spent on the second versus the first, because once you've done it, okay, great. Right, I'm going to have Cirrus help with lease negotiations. I'm going to have Henry Schein help with the equipment and layout, and I'm going to use this designer, but I'm going to do this differently, and it made all the difference. So it's a challenge, because then the later stage career doctor who has the financial resources, then there's a perception of less value later on. But that's also a fallacy, because when they eventually go to sell the clinic, here in Ottawa or anywhere else, the number one reason why a practice deal dies at the 11th hour is because of the stupid lease. Right? And one little clause that either states that the landlord can terminate the lease just for asking to sell, or because of some little demolition or relocation clause that got snuck in 3 lease renewals ago that the doctor never noticed as they signed the renewal in between patients.
And in between all of those concerns, you've got different phases, really different and varied other push-pull mechanisms in these people's lives, right? In the early phases, unless I'm listening to you talk, okay, they're coming out with a lot of debt. They're worried about taking over the practice. But then you also have a young professional, practitioner, clinician who is either worried about their time frame, because when we're sitting them talking about the goals and needs, they might say, I want to start a family. So this, female practitioner all of a sudden now knows they're going to want to have 1, 2, 3 children, have to think about the financial implications of that and their practice, in addition to all the concerns you have. You might have a male practitioner who says, I want to be supporting and be taking time off to be raising the family. And those are concerns now in addition to, and again, we talked about this the last time, about if you did a list of a value statement, most of these people, when you're talking to them, family is right at the top of that list. So yes, they're entrepreneurial. Yes, they're hard workers. They're diligent, but they want to spend time with the family. They want to travel. They want to build wealth to enjoy time with the family, do things together. So this is interfering with their ability to do some of the functioning we're talking about, to be efficient at tax planning, to make sure they're excellent business owners. It's about these demands in their lives that are competing against the thing that they really want to do the most of, which is family time. And then again, the late practitioner, the person who's years away from retirement, they're thinking about how can I spend more time with my family? But it's like now the concern becomes, do you understand the tax implications? Do you understand how to take that wealth from your practice and put as much as you possibly can in your pocket? What if you've spent a lifetime building this incredible amount of wealth? You're passing along to your spouse, to your family, but then you didn't do it right. The structure is not right. And there's inefficiencies and you're a loss of wealth, loss because of taxation. Is that important to you? And suddenly it's like, yes, that's massively important.
Especially after they've paid X amount of millions of dollars in taxes over
Sure.
the years, and they say enough
Sure.
is enough.
On even simple things, like even now we still educate. Like this is the one that you talk about is like, registered assets and how they're held. Like most people don't realize that depending on what your time frame is, the wealth you've built, etc., there can be a huge tax burden there. Not a tax burden to them necessarily because they won't be here, but a huge tax loss. So it's taking the time to paint it out. It's kind of like going into a football game and not really understanding the rules of the game until you're halfway through the fourth quarter. You've kind of put yourself in a position where it's like, don't you think the game would have gone better if you knew the rules to the game in the first quarter?
Yeah, if you break that down even further, so if you break it down into those three buckets, as you just said, right? The early career clinician, and in her case, speaking to lots of different female doctors that are thinking about the next step in kids, etc. A lot of them are now feeling an extra time pressure to start the business. Because, hey, I was younger and yes, I was traveling, or I was just so focused on paying off my debt, and they were an associate for years. The challenge for a lot of those female dentists that might take off 9 months or 12 months, more or less, etc., is as an associate dentist, you're creating relationships, you're creating value, you're doing the great work. You leave, right, and come back, and all relationships are gone. So you're almost starting from scratch again. So there's a lot of clinicians that will then start the business right around the time that they're then looking to have their first or second child, because at least then there's a business that's running, there's a hygiene going, there's marketing that's being done. Now, some doctors will come back and start to work, right, similar to my mom, a few months right after giving birth, because hey, the business still needs to run, let it be office management or the actual running of the practice. But that's another big driver, is to say, well, hey, now that I'm about to start a family, I really need a business now. If not, right, that other business that I've just been an employee for years is going to benefit, and or I'm going to lose all the momentum and seniority and everything that I've had there. So that's the early stage doctor. They're thinking now, personal guarantees, who cares, right? The bank's got my pound of flesh, right? The landlord wants a personal guarantee, sure, no problems, right? Take a number,
Sure.
right? I'm deep in debt. But then the mid-career doctor, suddenly now they think, oh, okay, well, I've been working for 10 years. Well, now maybe I do want to buy the real estate. Now maybe, right, I want to think about my second or third location. So now suddenly priorities have changed. Well, what do you mean I'm personally guaranteeing the lease? And what do you mean that I'm guaranteeing the lease even after I sell? Whoa, right? I realize that, hey, it's not what's fair or not fair. They've now heard enough sort of issues with some of their colleagues that they realize, hey, maybe I do need to get some advice. Maybe I do need to, look at the lease. Maybe I do need to get some, effective financial and estate planning here, because if I haven't, there's usually 2 or 3 examples of those anecdotal stories that they think, shoot, here's something that didn't happen, and I'm in the same situation, or my lease says the same thing. And then the transitioning doctor, different. Now it's suddenly, God, I've been working for way too long. I'm exhausted. I've gone through COVID. I've gone through all these staffing challenges. I can't get a hygienist for less than $50 an hour in the city of Ottawa. Oh my God, right? And suddenly I just, heaven forbid, there's a health issue, or the doctor is just, hey, I gotta go. And then at that point, it becomes almost a fire sale, because most of the buyers, especially the corporate buyers, they want the dentist to stay on for another 2, 3+ years. So they run into this scenario where they've already started to wind themselves down 2 days from 4 days a week, 3 days a week, 2 days a week. And by doing so, it dramatically reduces the revenue, dramatically reduces the EBITDA. And by the time they want to sell for that big check, at that point, it's already driven down, just because the doctor needed a break. So in most cases, we typically do courses and CE courses to say, 5 to 10 years prior to transitioning is the best time to think about structuring the lease, structuring your estate, getting rid of the bad assets. We've done a lot with MNP and all the butterfly purification type of stuff to make sure that by the time they do go to sell, they've got the flexibility that they can. Another doctor I met in Vancouver, she's stuck. She's signed a new lease. She's got a demolition clause that prevents her from selling it where she is today. So she would have wanted to retire and do a lot more coaching and training, but now she's stuck at least for another 5 years. Or even worse, she's now got to wait the 5 years and then open a new clinic just to prepare for sale. There's a devastating 5-star Google review that was there of a doctor in Northern California that was 73 years of age. She tried to sell her practice 3 separate times. Every time the landlord said no. So the landlord was another tenant in the same strip mall, wanted her end unit, lots of natural light, good signage, right past the main thoroughfare, wanted her space. She tried to sell it to a partner, to a corporate buyer. Every single time the landlord said no. So there she was at 73, being forced to relocate her clinic just in preparation for sale.
Ouch.
That's not good.
Ouch, ouch.
Nuts. Now, luckily, we were able to move her, a few minutes north. We got the landlord to cover almost all of the build-out costs, but still 74 years of age when you should be enjoying the kids and grandkids and just
Not worrying about that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Now suddenly I've got to work. So then you're resentful, you're frustrated, and you're saying, "Oh shoot, I should have done this in the past, but oh wow, this is sort of my pain and penance for having delayed or procrastinating, etc." So,
Sure. So as you see, Eric, I got a question for you. Maybe you think of this. As you start seeing this world of higher efficiencies and mergers and acquisition, I can only imagine that the average size of a dental practice is getting larger because it might have started off 20 years ago was a dentist and 2 assistants. Now you've got 4 or 5 dentists, maybe some are contractors. The practice size is larger. Are you starting to see more partnerships where you have multiple ownerships, multiple people owning a practice?
No. In terms of individuals, there's the old, rule of thumb is, a partnership can be, as bad as a marriage and usually ends up in divorce, etc. So, if most clinicians that are growing or multiple locations can bring in partners, but that's usually under the umbrella of the main parent corp that's growing under the single brand. You'll have most individual clinicians that'll then, because of all the young associates that just don't want to go through the headache of being an owner, they will, maybe it's a profit share, maybe it's, something else that gives them some value. But in terms of actual 2 doctors wanting to be in a partnership, very difficult, right? Difficult as decisions are being made, leases are being signed, staffing, costs, etc. There are lots of friends we know that, partnership was a great way to sort of get started, but it was not the way things were going to go moving forward. So the divorce is messy. And no, what we see is almost the opposite. You see the individual clinician getting bigger and bigger, adding a second location, adding a third location, adding a fourth location, and they are typically the exclusive owner across the board.
Wow. So risks through the roof then, because again, it's a fair comment. Partnership can muddy the water sometimes, but it also helps mitigate risk as you grow, because now you have there's more you're averaging out the decision making, mitigating some of that risk. But now, if you have only one person, one primary decision maker, that person gets sick, dies early, doesn't do planning, waits too long, some of that risk becomes larger.
Massive. Like when you consider even what Eric talked about earlier, if they own their own real estate and they have it in their corporation, that's a complete disaster. Right, and that's just planning at its finest, right there. People are like, "Wow, I don't give a shit. I got lots of money. We'll just deal with that later."
Someone else's problem.
Someone else.
I don't care. I'll be dead.
Right, but if someone could show you that you could do something for pennies on the dollar versus getting taken to the cleaners. Why not take that coffee?
I think it's overcoming that rejection that they first have, right? Because if you say to someone, "We're going to help," or "We can help," then sometimes you get someone saying, "I'm good. I'm good at this. I've built a practice myself. I've built a great deal of wealth up already." So I was telling Corey earlier, I had an interesting conversation one time with a guy that was kind of a do-it-yourselfer, and he had built wealth. He was a smart enough person to do that. So he's saying, Shawn, I've built up this, I've kind of war chest. I've got about almost $3 million here. So I'm feeling like I don't need that extra advice. I'm not sure if that advice layer is going to help me. So I think that's good. I'm good. And then just before they were going to get up, I just said, that's fantastic. I appreciate your opinion. Can you just let me know the first asset you'll sell when you retire? Like which order are you going to sell those assets in? He's like, you got me. And I said, I'll see you at the next meeting.
Yeah.
It was just, yes, you've built the wealth and you did a great job, but sometimes you just don't know, you don't have the next step. Is it efficiencies? Is it the order? Is it understanding the complex rules to that? That's where it's sometimes nice to get an advice piece.
Well, if you look at it from the standpoint, sure, you might get lucky and pick a couple of great winners in your investment portfolio over the years, but how many losers do you have in there? And then how do you know where to take it from, like you said?
Yeah.
Right? Should I be building my wealth in my corporation? Oh, I didn't even know I could do that. Should I be putting all my money in RSPs? Or where should I be putting all my money? What should I be doing, right? Like it's you shouldn't take this stuff lightly. Like it's your livelihood, it's your wealth, it's everything. Like it's you must baby that.
Or even tax efficiency on wealth, on your portfolios. Like Corey's CIO for our team. So like we've had some really great conversations, and I've learned a lot just listening to Corey talk about his portfolio management. But you break down taxation on investments, on how that looks. Like that return can look a lot different when you start taking taxation into effect. When someone says, "Oh, I made 5%," it's like, "Is that you made 5%? That's your gross. What did you keep on that?" Right? So sometimes they don't understand the underlings to how that investment grew, what was taxed, what wasn't. Was it taxed efficiently? And that's where you must see it all the time.
Well, we're in this high interest rate environment right now, so people make decisions with cash. And they, if you're sitting on a pile of cash in your bank account, in your corporate account, and you're like, looks pretty good. I'm going to buy a GIC. Sounds like a good idea. It's guaranteed money. Well, you get a 5% return on it. Then it's guaranteed. That sounds great. What if you're only keeping 2.5? Is it still a good investment? If you're losing 50% to tax, might want to consider that one, right? You might want to think about that as opposed to just what's the return I can make. It's the same thing. Capital gains, dividend income. Are you paying attention to it? If you have a corporation, focus on capital gains. There's a reason. There's a special little thing called a capital dividend account. It's a magical thing that might be able to give you some tax-free dividends.
Income splitting. There's lots of different opportunities here.
Family trusts, capital gain, like lifetime capital gains exemption, right? Maybe you might be able to involve some other people in that to take advantage of, I don't know, getting close to $1 million.
It's shocking when you tell people you can, the beneficiary layouts and adding of beneficiaries and how we can multiply that. And they're like, what?
Yeah. And that's planning.
It's the case studies that are evident, just like the one we did, with that doctor. Here's one that sold for $4 million. Here's another one that sold for 3.5, and the 3.5 ended up paying to a factor of 10x of tax unnecessarily versus the one with the $4 million practice, and then extended the lifetime capital gains exemption right to multiple different family members. Not part of our core business at all, but it really does go to reinforce the point of it's the tiny little steps, and it's the questions. What we have the privilege of doing are doctors that are mid-career or just even early stage is, doctor, how much revenue are you generating in your clinic for collections, net collections? What is what's your revenue per chair type of thing. Well, gosh, if you're at $250,000 per chair, usually that's when the itch starts to occur to potentially expand into the adjacent suite, or, to more effectively grow, or to reach out to ADEC to try to get these magical double-decker chairs type of thing, so you can do twice as much, production from one operatory. And then the same questions are, how are you comparing to some of your peers for key performance indicators? So we're usually asking, what's your tenancy expense? What's your tenancy expense as it relates to your annual revenue? And typically we see about 8.32%. So every dollar you bring in, 8.5 cents are going towards the landlord. So it helps to now frame what it looks like from the buyer side. But one of the difficult pieces, back to just putting a stake in that core point we're all making, is that, when the doctor, all of us are inherently selfish. What the biggest challenge we try to share is that, think about it from the buyer side, right? If I was advising the buyer to your clinic and you want $2.5 million, here's the red flags in the lease that I'd want to highlight that technically may even justify your practice being worth less because of the liability now your buyer is taking on. So many doctors think, I want to sell in the next 5 or 10 years, and I'll just go month to month because, hey, that keeps it fresh and gives me the opportunity to sell and walk away. Or if it doesn't go through, I can just walk away. That is absolutely the biggest mistake a doctor can make, especially with $1 million plus producing practice. If you're only producing a couple 100,000, there's only a handful of couple hundred patients, then maybe it makes sense just to sell your charts. But if you're running a successful, busy clinic, then what are they buying? They're buying the cash flow. They're buying the likelihood that these patients are going to continue to come in. They're going to continue to, help the next doctor pay off their multi-million-dollar loan to buy your clinic. And it's why the banks now are really driving a lot of this, because the banks will not give that loan unless there's sufficient term on the lease. So yeah, we really try to break it down by asking some of those key questions. And then it's the did you know? I was sharing this in Vancouver, that valuation I shared a little bit last week. It was a $525,000 drop in the practice valuation, all because of one little clause in Article 76, subsection 3 of the lease that basically stated the landlord could demolish or substantially renovate the building, of which the landlord could kick out the doctor with a little 6 months worth of notice.
Which then brings into the microscope that people have when they're engaging with people like us, yourself, in terms of fees, costs. And you're like, if you were to pay just maybe a few thousand in fees, and you might save $1 million in tax.
Totally. Oh my God.
That's a pretty good rate of return.
Well, then have someone accountable, like all the things we talked about. Have somebody holding you accountable to get the goals done, keep you on track, look after like we talked about this last time. I highly recommend the last one on the consulting and the services and the lease agreements. Like, these are massive.
Even just right down to people understanding why you should have dual wills when you're incorporated, right? Like, you don't want to pay more tax. You only want to pay probate once. Go get another freaking will. It's not expensive.
And how many business owners do you have that conversation with? And what's the pushback you get? Because you've got lots that have done their personal wills. They then incorporated, and many don't even know, right, that a will could be helpful for your corp. So how do you handle those types of conversations, or how do you help to open that business?
Well, it's really math, right? Like, you're really showing somebody, here's what it's going to cost if you don't do it, right? Like, here's, it's like, if you have the ability to prepay something, it's always cheaper than when it comes time to actually pay for it, right? And so, like, for a dual will, if in the province of Ontario, I don't know, if your corporation's got a couple $1 million in it at 1.5% to settle it,
Man.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't think there's a whole lot of pushback, Eric, once you start having the conversation.
Education.
I feel like the most difficult part is to get someone committed to having that, again, I say critical conversation, but it is a critical conversation, to get them committed to have that conversation. There's so many times I want to have the conversation and someone may not be ready for it. They're busy, they're distracted, they're not focused. It's not important to them at that particular junction. But if you can sit down and have this kind of conversation, man, not too many times do I get pushback. When I start drafting it out and saying, this is what's important. This is why it's important. Here's the risks that you're exposed to. Here's what it looks like for you and your family, for your business, if you die tomorrow, if you get sick tomorrow. Here's your exposure. There's a lot of pale faces, open eyes, and then you've got their attention now. It's like, hey, you got my attention. It's like, okay, let's talk. And I'm your ally. Like I'm working with you. We're not working against you. We're on the same team. I'm just trying to make this really easy for you. Solve your problems. And it's like, so to your point, Corey, I totally agree. It's like, put us on your team. Like this, these practitioners or whoever else we're speaking to, like you've got a team of people. All we're asking for is an opportunity to be part of your team. Kind of like you, Eric. It's like, hey, I want to advocate for you. I don't want you to be going blind into this and making these decisions and not understanding. Eric, you and your team are advocating for them. We're advocating for them as well. It's like, we're going to be a member of your team, provide services to you, put a layer around you in your practice so that you have all these areas looked after: tax efficiency, retirement planning, estate planning. We'll be able to coach you through this, and you can pick up the phone. Like, this is when people say, I'm not sure, but it's like, hey, it's the fall of 2008. Markets are crashing. Lehman Brothers just happened. You try calling somebody and getting an answer. It's difficult. You want somebody you need a trusted relationship that you can pick up the phone and have it like within minutes to say, is everything okay? Do I understand? Have you explained it to me properly? Do I know where I'm going? Am I on track? And it's like, yes, you are. Everything's fine. Yeah. Makes a big difference.
And it's the amount of time we hear, oh, you know what, my family member was a lawyer and they looked at it in 1986. Or, a good friend of mine was a broker and helping negotiate XYZ. Or there's this sense of feeling like someone else is, looking out for them, or someone else would have shaken them by the shoulders before to get some of this stuff done, when ultimately the onus is on themselves. So there's a lot of, in some cases, misguided trust if they don't have an advisor or someone on the financial planning side that they've given them sort of the path and the keys. Oh, I thought it was just always taken care of. I didn't think these issues would be in my lease, etc. I went to a great course, which could be great for the listeners, that was a good friend of mine, Simon Partington, put on with an author that was just talking about how to bridge the gap of talking to your family about wills and estate planning. And one of the best guidance was theirs. They took out the stigma to the will, which is sort of the peak of all of this, is what happens next, everything we've been talking about today. So part of what they did was they would have family meetings, right? Let that be in a warm location or another location once a year. And the kids, right, would actually sort of quote unquote chair the meeting as the, people to discuss, okay, great, here's the plan from grandpa to, right, the kids to then the grandkids. Here are the charities we want to have. Here is the plan for the cottage. Here's the plan for the business, etc. And it was a really neat way of, first of all, empowering the kids from the early age about, hey, what happens if? Number two is, because it's an open communication, it's not suddenly like, oh, well, dad wants to be cremated and no, mom wanted this. And suddenly it rips apart the family. And usually then they just liquidate everything, right? The building that, the father had built by hand with hand-hewn timbers, and suddenly now all of this has to be sold purely because it's now all about dollars and cents, and it's nuts. So
heartbreaking,
right? Yeah, devastating. So yeah, it was a really neat best practice of saying, let's get everybody together while everybody's here, and just have those open conversations. And I'm sure working with your clients, here's the top 10 questions to ask yourselves on the estate as to what happens if. What do you want, right? Dad, grandpa, etc.
Sure.
In your beyond. Well, I definitely don't want to go into that government and its taxes. Okay, well, I built the cottage by myself. Well, I certainly don't want that to be sold, that's counterintuitive to everything. Okay, maybe I do need to rip off the Band-Aid and actually get this thing done.
Well, you look at even buy-sell agreements, right? So lease agreements, buy-sell agreements, when should people be looking at those? Someone will say, I don't know, like on a very recurring basis, right? There's probably things in both of those. Maybe things need to be addressed, updated. Things might have changed, right? That's the last thing one needs, is to have something happen and go, oh, shit, why didn't we update this?
If some type of emergency transition plan often blends in or lends itself when you have a buy-sell. Like if you have a solo practitioner, who's going to look after the practice? If that person has a stroke or heart attack at 68 years old, can no longer practice. Does evaluation become a fire sale? So this is becoming very popular now, is to have some kind of emergency transition plan in the event of my disability that I can't return to work.
Funny you mentioned that. I had, lunch earlier with Neil, and what they're doing now on the practice brokerage side is to have, sort of an article of direction, right? Or a letter of direction that upon death, right? If death, break glass type of thing. And in there, there's here's the practice brokerage that did the valuation within the last 5 years. Here's the lease in place to separate the real estate corporation from the practice corporation. Don't let, right? Here's how this needs to be done now in the event of, right, untimely death. And yeah, there was a devastating example in the northeast of the US where the doctor had passed away, and because there weren't leases in place, because they weren't paying themselves rent, multi-million-dollar clinics, only one of the 3 sold, purely because of the fact through the process after the doctor passed away, the stats are astounding. Usually if it doesn't sell within the first 90 days, the likelihood, much higher likelihood that it never sells at all. So yeah, it's one of those things you never want to think about, but boy, is that ever great to know that you've got this piece. And I have the conversation all the time with it's even the password management side, right? Imagine from an estate planning when there's no passwords or transition. So even now, if it's from 3 generations of having a password manager, because then it's death certificates and trying to go, you've just created now 10,000 hour project over the next X amount of years just for the
lawyers
logins.
Dying to get their hands on it.
Oh my God.
Process that.
And so it's all of those things that to do that in advance. Google, I set up that recently, right? So there's a feature in Google that if you don't check your email or log in within X amount of 6 months, 3 months, something, then you can set up to go to your wife or your father or your son, etc., through the process. So at least then your digital access is there. And that was devastating for even people where tragically the son or otherwise had passed away or suicide or otherwise, and access to the photos is gone. Right. And and then it's just a massive piece. So yeah, it's those little things. I'm a huge advocate for using those password managers because it keeps it so simple. And it's those pieces. Hey, honey, if anything happens to me, right? What's the password? What's the login? And do they still have the ability to run the family? If
you keep coughing here, you might be dead anyway. So we might be having our first emergency transition plan right here. So I guess, again, we're harping on the same things, right? Like it's planning, and taking that time. When you think about a medical practitioner, they're very methodical in what they do. So be methodical with your business. Be methodical with your exit. Be methodical with your retirement.
And it's partially how they're trained in school, right? If you're going into the operatory, as my old man reminded me many times, is you'd think you're almost prone to thinking negatively, right? If I go in to remove a gallbladder, if I'm going in to do the appendix or otherwise way back when with a physical scalpel, right, rather than all the little lasers they're using today and whatnot. But, if I'm coming in, what happens if, right, I nick an artery, right? What happens if, right, suddenly I puncture the bowel? What do I do next? And it's this cascading element of negativity, which can also go through in your personal life, but it's that, what do I do next if there's this ever increasing emergency? And that's exactly the way to look at it for themselves and the practice and the business, is the good analogy. Hey, what happens if, right, I go to sell and 2 weeks prior to selling, I pass away, right? Or my wife passes away, right? What do we now? What's kids? What's childcare? What's all of these different components? And yeah, if you follow that same methodology that they teach in medical and dental school, it does allow to say the what ifs, right?
Sure.
Right. What if I'm being forced to relocate? What if I, right, have to bring in a partner? What if I have to move cross country? All these sort of what ifs happen, and they can be easily avoidable.
It's usually a jaw dropper when you're talking about it, and you're speaking about, okay, you have a stroke. Who's in charge of the business now? Who's a legal entity to do payroll, to interact with the bank? Who can make decisions? And sometimes nobody else can. So your business is paralyzed. Is that what you wanted? And it's probably not, clearly. But I think it's important that they're at least aware of that situation, and we resolve that, or help give guidance to say, okay, here's some steps that you probably should consider to help resolve this problem. It's not uncommon. It's very common.
And it's I don't know about you, but it seems to be the amount of people I've heard of with health-related issues lately, or family members with health-related issues, is staggering.
I feel like it's because we're getting older and we're paying more attention, but it's shocking.
Who knows? Timing, post-COVID, lack of care, lack of preventative type of medicine. But even my uncle, when my kids went to see him today, and he was one of 43 cases of a very unique type of stroke that was a bilateral stroke that happened, right, 6 years ago. And currently, I think, is the only known survivor of this rare bilateral stroke. So much so they didn't even find it in the first few scans because it was just so low in the body. So it's, and this was a big, vibrant skier and sailor and everything else. So the components then become and then even just having to figure out everything, even just basic signatures become an issue when you're paralyzed from the jaw down, is now a huge. And if you don't have a family or a loving family or a big family that is retired or otherwise to help handle all these things, it's just created this, taxes become this momentous issue.
Sure.
And other friends of friends or colleagues that, the friend had passed away and committed suicide and didn't, started with a note, didn't go through the full process and just left. And it was his best friend left to deal with the spouse and the debts and the cars and everything else and the taxes. And just not even having access to an account makes it almost impossible. So it's those sorts of things. It's almost a selfishness in some cases, right? Well, that's for someone else to do. But first of all, you don't want to be that other person. And secondly, with that little extra step to say, hey, if I go, here's how to get access to all the passwords. Here's how to make sure that the business runs on Monday morning. And there's always that extra failover. If you get hit by a bus, here's the next step. Same thing applies to all the financial perspectives, right? Making sure your financial planner has access to all of that. The kids should know, right? Hey, I need to reach out to Corey if something happens, because here's exactly what happens.
Sure.
Step 2, step 3, step 4.
Is my family going to be okay? Do we have enough? Are things set up properly? This one makes the rounds when we talk amongst the financial planning community. But I believe it's a dentist, successful practice, younger, right? They clearing snow on the weekend in the winter, using their snowblower, and we've all had that where it doesn't throw anymore. So their hand goes in the wrong spot. Next thing you know, they have a very severe hand accident with the snowblower. Can't practice dentistry anymore. Don't have the dexterity, missing, problematic, etc. What happens then? What happens if that's year 5 for you? You were expecting to have a 30-year career. You were expecting you have this lease. You've got employees and staff. You were expecting to pay yourself a certain wage and increase it over the next many years and have a successful, career in dentistry. But that's not the way this is going to pan out now. So now how does it look? What's going to pay you? How does it look? Do you have enough? Can you and your spouse still retire the way you wanted to, even though you're only 35 years old and something awful just happened? You need to have that kind of peace of mind, that kind of security. And I think that can only be accomplished with kind of going down the rabbit hole, talking about planning, spending some time going through the exercise to say, here's what you have to do.
And it's beyond just I got insurance for that, right? There was a doctor who attended one of my CE courses in Denver, was a dental specialist. And lo and behold, less than a year after the course, was running around on a little motorcycle, Vespa, etc. They found him clear across the intersection, no other vehicles, don't know what happened. The helmet was, 50 yards away. He was 50 yards away from the bike that was 50 yards away from the other. And he was in the hospital for well over a year. And suddenly, what's going on with the location, the lease, and the practice, etc. And it basically grinds to a halt. And now the disability insurance or life insurance disability insurance is now covering X amount. But do you really want to, have this $9,000 payment coming from this probably less than what it should have been disability insurance? And they're stuck. So, and that's the key thing with dentists is they might not be disabled, but they're certainly not practicing wet finger dentistry if suddenly, they can't hold their elbow up at the proper angle of attack, or they slice their index finger and hit a nerve on the fence as they walked out the door. Right. So it's the other element of saying, yes, there's this insurance for insurance, but why not add provisions to the lease, such as a death and disability clause, which is great for any of your owners, because especially for those clinicians or business owners that are doing 50, 60, 70% of the revenue themselves, then just having that extra section gives them, or at least the estate, to either A, terminate the lease and walk away with as little as 3 or 4 months later. So it's sort of like a life insurance policy that doesn't cost the doctor a penny. Or more importantly, it can allow the estate to renew the lease, right? If you're not there, if you're dead, then you're in default and you're the personal guarantor, and you are the one that can only be the one to renew the lease for another 5 years, which is needed to get enough term for the buyer. So even having little sections that allow the estate to renew the lease in preparation for sale, oh gosh, I never even thought of that. It speaks to the fact of just, it's surrounding yourself with the specific, right, planners and advisors that have the experience particular to you, your industry, etc. And then, you'd be amazed at how much free advice you get by just having an initial call to determine, did you know, right, doctor, or were you aware of this, or when was the last time someone professionally reviewed their lease? These little things, will do for any of your listeners, but it's just one of those extra elements that if you haven't done it in that 3 or 4 or 5 years, doesn't take much to look at it. What about your employment contracts?
Right.
Our lovely province has made it even more difficult over the past few weeks to have employees and employee contracts, etc. So, when was the last time those were reviewed? Right? All of that sort of fits through. Doctors that go to sell their clinic suddenly realize they don't have any enforceable contracts, or they may not even have an employment contract with Justine, who's been in the practice for 29 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So we should just title this podcast, this podcast could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Basically,
More.
by the time that
Probably more, yeah.
hard to, like save yourself so much, because by the time that you spend time with Eric and your team and to review the leases and understand the obligations and some common sense provisions that can help them navigate to a better financial position. Spending time with our team, doing financial planning, taking the time to understand their personal and corporate needs and goals, matching those up and pairing those up with a variety of different solutions that best fit them. This is a massive improvement to their financial situation.
Well, for people that are A-type personalities, for people that, drive their own ship, they want to maintain control. So don't let it get out of control. Maintain control by putting in the right measures, by looking at what is my strategy for if I'm sick, if I die, if I sell, can I maintain? People don't even realize that when they sell their practice, you can still maintain control if it's structured properly.
Sure.
Right? Like if you're so worried about losing control, keep it.
Yes.
Let us show you how.
And in most cases, they want to own it and then just retire and remotely manage the clinic. But in many cases, they don't, because either it's not set up that way, or they just get tired, or I'll just sell it on the open market.
Yep.
And yes, yet it could have been right designed that way, but you've got to have the right advisor. You've got to figure out what you need to live on, right? How to incentivize your associate dentists and how to structure that like a larger corporation would that doesn't have owner-occupiers and owner-operators. So those are exactly. It can work, but there's a level of commitment to it and certainly a level of proactive preparedness, and there's a cost to that preparedness as well.
You need a runway. You need time, right? And you can't do these things at the finish line because it's too late. Yep. Any other words?
No, I was just thinking this has been a great, very powerful session. I thought the last one was really good. I walked away with that with a really good feeling. But today I've really enjoyed just getting into the nitty gritty of what what's to be expected. What services can be provided, why that's important, and then just taking the time, like you said, Corey, just taking the time, digging in.
And no, for the people listening, we're here to help, all of us, right? Like we're here to help your practice. We're here to help your life. We're going to help simplify things, and we're going to let you work and be good at and do the things that you're good at.
Yeah, do what you're good at.
Yeah,
we'll do what we're good at. Yep. Make a power team. It's like the Avengers, basically.
Yeah. Back to the Avengers, yeah.
And the second opinion, right? What you've compelled me to do is, sure, I've got the professional team, etc. But how powerful is it to send you over the articles of incorporation, send you over the, financial plans, investments, etc., and then saying, hey, what else, right? What else are we missing?
Yeah. What can we do here?
Second opinion. That's why the number 2 is always good. Second helping at a nice dinner.
Oh, yeah, a little turkey. Good. I like
second podcast with Eric.
Yeah.
Bang on.
This is, and then always the second follow-up to a good movie or to a good book.
I like it. Well, thank you, gentlemen. It's been a great show today.
It's been great. Thank you, Eric, for joining us.
Eric.
Really appreciate
Pleasure.
it. You're clearly an expert in what you do. I love the wisdom and the banter. And Corey, thank you so much, and great having you on.
That's great.
Pleasure. Looking forward to it. And, the reminder I always do with our clients is, look, you're not alone in all of this. It feels so lonely at times. It feels through COVID and everything else. You're sort of there against this behemoth. But if there's any good takeaway for the listeners is they're not alone. You got great trusted resources to help ensure that you've got someone else looking out for you. And ultimately, especially for a lot of the dentist physicians, I mean, if they haven't given themselves a pat on the back, having gone through the past 3 or 4 years of hell, they certainly deserve it. So it's a nice time to think from the far side and now thinking about that actual retirement and that actual sailboat and the ability to make that vision a reality.
So for us, anyone wanting to connect, more of us, is at ACVDA, which is www.ecivda.com. And for yourself, Eric, why don't you just remind, for those who didn't catch the first one, can you just let them know how to best connect with you?
Yeah, so the easiest way is email info@cirrusconsultinggroup.com, CIRRUS consultinggroup.com. Direct line, call me 24/7 if I can get out of a bedtime and chat with a doctor that's maybe in distress or losing some sleep. You're certainly not alone in it. So 647-789-3255 is the direct line, rings through the bat phone, and happy to support. It's these things in our world, probably yours as well, they go from the least bit of importance to suddenly, oh my God, this is now the issue of the day, and I got to solve this today. So we unfortunately deal with a lot of those.
When you don't plan ahead, it's always important. It's like, oh my God, we got to fix this like yesterday.
Don't fail to plan.
That's right. Thanks again, Eric.
You got it.